Quite often, actually. Quite often. I had a piece of chocolate chunk cookie in there right now during lunch.
Okay.
So.
Oh, they're asking you, not me?
Yeah. Yeah, yours isn't long enough to get crumbs in it yet. Gee, I wonder where some of these are coming from.
I'm dizzy from bending down.
Cool.
Again, if you're just joining us, on the screen is our Wi-Fi password. And
Yes. Just as it appears.
Slido.com, and enter that code, and that's how we'll be taking questions. We'll say right off the bat that you can be, this is the sex talk, okay? So ask whatever.
Literally,
like,
whatever.
If it's not appropriate, I won't.
We'll screen it,
Yeah, that's why we're doing it anonymously.
Because last year we made the mistake of putting this up on the screens. I remember. Yeah, we had a fun comment last year that kind of made everyone lose their minds. So we're not going to put it up on the screen this year. Yeah. But we can see everything you're saying. And it's not anonymous. We know who you are. Just kidding. Just kidding. It's anonymous, right? It's anonymous?
Yo mama.
It might or might not be anonymous.
I mean, how would you know if we put our names? It's like april@gmail.com. It's like Drunkard wants to know. Why are you so stupid? How are your teeth feeling?
The internet doesn't work. No, I'm not going to say that. If you replace the I in 6 with an E, what does it say?
Sex.
Correct. All right, it's go time.
Let's do it. All right. So my name is Drew.
Hi, Drew.
Hi guys, and this is my good friend Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hello.
So I'm gonna go ahead and open us up with a word of prayer, and then we'll get going. Is everyone cool with that? We're doing it anyways. Well, Father, we do thank you so much for how good you are. Lord, we've had the opportunity thus far to already see in your word, listening to testimonies, Lord, beholding what you would say and what you would think and feel about certain things. So I just pray that we would have an attitude, a mindset. We would be children who would be interested in what you say. And that's where we would draw our beliefs from. It'd be you and what you say. That's where we would draw our opinions, where we would draw our our boundaries that we function as humans. Because we're made in your image, and so we want to reflect you. In Jesus' name, we all say amen. Amen. Cool. So on the count of 3, I just want everyone to yell sex at the top of your lungs really loud, okay? Ready? Ready? Is everyone ready?
Yes.
You don't get to normally do this in church.
What do you mean? Jeremy makes you do this all the time.
All right, so I'm gonna say 1, 2, and then we'll say it all together after 3. Not on 3, after 3. Okay? 1, 2, 3. Sex! All right, now it's out of our system. We put it out there. We are talking. We're not just talking about sex today, but we are going to talk about sex today for sure. That's why we made our title the Sex Talk. But a good place to really start with this issue of sex and sexuality, and the subtitle of this breakout is why God's guidelines for sex and sexuality are best. The best place to start is with this concept of Imago Dei. Everyone say Imago Dei.
Imago Dei.
And that's a Latin term that literally means God's image, or image of God. If you've grown up in church, you've heard this a lot. If you've grown up in church and you haven't heard this, because you probably weren't listening very well. But in the beginning, right, God created the heavens and the earth, and then he gets to the part when he creates male and female. And as the verse says up there, then God said, let us make man in our image. It's kind of cool how he said our. That's a reference to the Trinity, I believe. Most scholars would believe. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, to rule over the fish of the sea, the birds, livestock, for all the earth itself, every creature that crawls on it. And so God reaped man, or made man, in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. That is the basis of where we need to start. And when we think about anything concerning us as human beings, is that we've been made in the very image of God. We could spend, and we probably will, spend eternity learning more and more deeply what that means. In the image and likeness of God, we have reason, we have language, we have morality, we have communication, all these things that really separate us from the rest of God's creation. On the most basic level, what it means to be made in the image of God. Like if I was to ask you the question, what does it mean to be an image bearer? Well, images are made to image. And so that means that we as human beings, on a basic level, to be made in the image of God means that we are supposed to reflect and image who God is. Right? That the way that we function, the way that God's designed us to function should be to represent the character and the nature of the God of the universe himself. And Jeremy, we have some Legos up on the
Yeah, any Lego fans in the room? I love Lego. I still do. So when I had kids, and it was like, oh, I can't wait to buy them, pass on my Lego sets and buy them new Lego sets. So if you're familiar with getting a Lego set, it comes with this instruction manual, shows you every piece, and step by step you build into whatever that case or that set is supposed to look like, right? And they end up looking really cool. Like, I mean, whoever designs these things is ingenious, right? But I like to explain God's design using that as an example. So my younger son, he's really impatient and has the attention span of like 3 minutes. And so when I'll get him a new Lego set and he'll start building it. And pretty soon he gets frustrated because he can't figure out, he can't understand what the next step in the design is. So then he'll like get mad and then just decide that he's just going to create this instead of the actual design of the set, right? And so is his creation at all as good as what the instructions would have led him to build? No. Like, yeah, he's my son, but I'm going to call it as it is. He usually made weird looking cars or houses, and they were like, you should have followed the directions, dude. It would have been way better, right? So if you think of God starting from scratch, he's like the master builder. And he's set up steps to he's designed something and given us direction to get where he knows is best. Yeah. Just because you get frustrated with the instructions doesn't mean that you get to make your own design or your set. You guys following me? Yeah. So as the master builder, he's laid out a certain design. Yeah. As us, more amateur builders, we can't just decide, hey, this design is going to be better than God's. And so when it comes to like gender issues and whether you think, oh, did God create me? I have these feelings, I have this, or, yeah, God said sex is for a married man and woman, but times have changed, so now that's creating your own design off of the master plan. You guys got me? Okay. Yeah,
I've used this analogy a lot over the years. It's kind of weird, but I've said it a lot. Like, I don't know who did this, but somebody out there invented the toaster, right? And we know that a toaster was invented to do what? Toast. Now, can you imagine if the inventor of the toaster, whoever that is, was to walk into a room and there's a bunch of people that were using a toaster trying to like hammer a nail into a piece of wood. Like just banging a toaster against a nail. Like, what would the inventor of the toaster say? That's not what it's made for. And then the people with the toasters are like, well, who are you to say that that's not what it's for? And then what would the guy say, or the girl? I invented it. That's not what it's for, right? And they would be justified in saying that because, after all, they invented the toaster. And that's how we should think about sexuality. That's how we should think. That's how we should think about sex. If you look with me at this verse of 1 Corinthians 7, 2 through 3, and 8 through 9, so we skipped some verses in there. I'm going to read this for us concerning marriage and singleness. So this is a continued thought that the Apostle Paul is saying, but because there is so much sexual immorality, everyone say sexual immorality. Sexual immorality. That's going to be important as we come back here in a few minutes. Each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife. Marital duty being sex. Say it loud and proud.
Sex.
And likewise the wife to her husband. Now to the, and then skipping ahead to verse 8. Now to the unmarried and widows I say this. It is good for them to remain unmarried as I am. So Paul was single. Paul wasn't married. But if they cannot control themselves, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. When we talk about these issues of like sex, sexuality, how do we express that? How do we handle these feelings of, you know, being like horny or whatever, that kind of stuff? It's a lot of times what the church has done in the past is that we've taken these issues and then we just like kind of shoved them under the rug, and we're like sex is naughty. Don't talk about that. You know? Like that's not a nice thing to talk about, and just be good, do good, and don't think about such things. You know. And the truth is, look at this verse, guys. This is awesome. Solomon wrote this. Solomon, he knew plenty about sex. He had way too much sex with way too many people, for sure. He had like over 300 wives and like another like 400 concubines. And then, and like with that in mind, he says this verse, and he's like, man, I really just should have stuck with my like OG wife, like my original wife. And this is what he says. He says, may your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, or for women, the husband of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful fawn. May her breasts satisfy you always. May you be captivated by her love for all days. Like sex, sexuality, all the expressions of sex, it is a good and awesome gift that God gave to us.
And it's further in the Bible in Song of Solomon. I mean, that book's all about sex.
Yeah, if you're not like married, you should be careful reading that book, because it's pretty explicit. It's like your breasts are like 2 pomegranates. Like it's not relevant to today. Like I wouldn't tell my wife that. Like she's like, thanks.
I tell
But guys, like sex was created by God, and it's not just for procreation. It's not just so that we can make babies. Sex was created by God for our enjoyment. It's something that God made. He designed it, and he said, man, they're going to love this gift that I've given them. It's great. It's awesome. There's nothing better physically than guilt-free sex in the context of marriage. It's the best. It's awesome. And so thinking along those lines, jumping ahead to the end of this, so guys, really need to hone in on this idea with marriage and singleness. Look what Paul says later on in this chapter. I want you to be free from concern. The unmarried man is concerned about the work of the Lord, how he can please the Lord. But the married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife. And his interests are, everyone say, divided. Divided. That word divided literally means cut in half. So a married person's attention is 50% towards their spouse and then 50% towards the Lord. That's their devotion. It's divided. And that's okay. It's not bad to have divided attention. That's how God designed marriage to be, to have divided attention. But he says the unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the work of the Lord. How can she be holy in both body and spirit? But the married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. Just like the man, her attention is divided, it's split in half. So what is Paul saying here? That it's better to be what? It's better to be what? Unmarried or single. Paul says, we read in verse 2, he's like, really, more of you should be as I am. And Paul was saying that I'm single, because you can more fully commit yourself to the work of the Lord. And for those of you that aren't married, what are you?
Single.
You're like, yeah, but I have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. No, no, no. If you're not married, say it again. What are you? Single. You're single. And we're not going to get into this whole idea of like, you know, you shouldn't date. We're not going to talk about that right now. What we want to talk about is what we should do and how we should handle such issues. And so for those of you in you who are not married or at a season of life where marriage really just isn't something that you can realistically or tangibly pursue, if you're in high school, I would venture to say that you're not, then singleness is what you should be intentionally pursuing. Jeremy, you were talking about this earlier. It's an opportunity that you have at this time of your life to pursue singleness. And
yeah.
How can that play out?
Man, you have a chance right now, and anyone who's dated or been in a relationship, you know that a divided attention is a good way of phrasing it. You've always got them to worry about. Man, if you're in a season of your life right now where that's not an issue, that's a blessing, because you can focus on the things that God has for you. I went through a few serious dating relationships in my early 20s that didn't pan out to marriage. And after the last one, when I say a few, I mean like 3, not like 18. And so after the last one didn't quite work out, I was like, man, God, like, this just isn't working for me. I just can't seem to find the person that I believe is supposed to be my wife. I guess you just have me to be single.
Yeah.
And that kind of freed me from like worrying about who I was going to meet or where I would meet her or whatever. And just, you know, God had me in ministry at the time, and I just, you know, kind of went just full in.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, 2 weeks later, I met my now wife. But sometimes stuff like that happens, right? As God gets you to a point where you're willing to say, hey, cool, this is where I am. Maybe this is what God has for me. Maybe it's not what I envisioned, but this is what you've given me, God. Let me go after it. And then sometimes you get to that point of just being like, cool, whatever you want from me, God. And then he ends up bringing you, you know, a relationship
Yeah.
or the person that he does intend for you, whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
my focus full on in ministry, what can I do to invest in people and serve you, God? And then thankfully he brought me a wife who had a similar passion and goal. So then we became that together.
Well, and if you guys look at that last little bullet point under, you know, this whole 1 Corinthians chapter 7 part.
Did anyone not get a handout,
yeah,
by the way?
Yeah, it's a little stack right here. It says that marriage between a man and woman is supposed to reflect the gospel. I challenge you guys to take your own time, read Ephesians 5, 20, really 21, because verse 21 says submit to each other out of reverence for Christ, and then it goes into this description of what a marriage should do. Man is Christ, and the woman is the church. Just as the church submits to Christ, so a woman should submit to her husband. And just as Jesus loved the church and was willing to lay his life down for her, so a man should be Christ to his wife, being willing to lay his life down for her. The purpose of marriage is ultimately it's supposed to reflect and embody this picture of the gospel. That Jesus was willing to give his life up for us. That's what marriage is for. It's an opportunity for people to observe the intended thing that it was supposed to do, to observe and then say, like, wow, I can see the gospel being preached here. And you know, we talked about this earlier, this passage at the end of verse 3, it says, verse 9, if they can't control themselves, let them marry, for it's better to marry than to burn with passion. Guys, full disclosure here, when I was engaged, and really when I started dating the woman who's now my wife, I was burning. Like, I had to like walk around like this, because every time I would be hanging out with her, I was just like, I just want to have sex with her. It's like all I want to do. And like in my mind, I was like, we just need to get. I would always tell her, like, babe, we need to get married. We need to get married because I'm burning. And what Paul isn't saying here, men and women alike, what Paul is not saying is that, well, if you can't keep it in your pants, get married. That's not what he's saying. Paul is saying, this is what Paul is saying. He's saying, guys, listen. Paul is saying, if you have a clear conscience, that you have made it your aim to pursue first and foremost God, if you've made it your intention to devote your entire being to the Lord, if you're working unto him, and then there just happens to be someone in your life that God's put beside you, as Jeremy was saying, and at the season of life you're in, and at the calling that's in both of your lives, you understand that y'all are in a similar place, and then under that, with a clear conscience, and with a proper understanding, you're like, man, I'm burning. Then it's like, well, then get married, so that you can start to reflect the gospel to people that are observing you. Right? This isn't a cop-out. Getting married and being able to have sex in the context of marriage is not a cop-out. The idea is that our first consideration is, man, our mentality needs to be glorifying God, whether you're single or whether you're married. We have a question. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Real quick,
Yeah.
Send your questions, because we'll keep talking if you don't talk through asking us questions. I do want to point out one thing real quick. This question right here. Does the Bible say that you cannot have sex outside of marriage? We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because it does. Okay? It's clear. You want to get real detailed? It tells you a lot of other things or people that you should not have sex with outside of your spouse. Read the book of Leviticus. It spells it out pretty clearly. It doesn't just say don't have sex with your not spouse, your girlfriend, whatever. It goes into brother, sister, mom, animals, etc., etc. If you nobody has an argument saying, well, it doesn't really say that, or times have changed. Nah, not on that. Okay? Not on that. On people's interpretation of it, yeah, sure, times have changed. But on God's design for it, hasn't changed. Okay?
Yeah.
So, got a question here. I just told my boyfriend I was single. Is that wrong? Going back to your thing. Yeah, so remember, singleness in terms of how God views your relationship, you're not committed for the rest of your life to the person you're dating right now. But it's not a good idea to tell your boyfriend that you're single. Sorry.
That's like that. It might come across like you broke up with them over text.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
that's fine if you did though.
Okay, that question, I'll get to that in a little bit.
Cool.
It'll fit a little bit better later. And then I think this one fits here. Why is sex so normalized in media?
That's what they want to do, everything opposite of the Bible. They want to normalize it so that when we do it, we feel normal, not abnormal about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and we'll address that here in a couple of slides more specifically about this whole idea of society normalizing things and diminishing things to elevate their own ideas. Like Jeremy said earlier today, right? Like sin diminishes, guys in the back, listen. Sin diminishes God in our minds. When we sin, when we indulge things that aren't of God, what it does is it brings God down. That's how we associate with God. So that, and that's awful, so that we can elevate these things that do not even kind of line up with God's intended purpose and plans.
Okay, real quick, how deep can our questions be? If you have a specific question, don't be afraid to ask.
Anything.
We will address it. Speaking of which, let me just jump right into that. If you don't mind, I saved something. I took a screenshot yesterday. I don't know if this is true in Texas, but go back to the other one real quick. Is sexual immorality only possible to participate in with another person? So in other words, is only having sex with your not spouse sinful? What do you guys think? Is that the only thing that's sinful?
Oh, no.
Okay. So, let's do the trash thing first.
Yeah.
So we have a picture of a trash dump here. So whenever the Bible uses the term sexual immorality, the Greek word for that is called porneia. Okay, where does that word lead to? Porn. Okay. So porneia refers to all kinds of sexual immorality, any kind of sexual immorality. So just like we use the term trash to refer to whatever. If there was a crumpled piece of paper, I'd be like, oh, can you pick up that trash? If there was chewed gum, I'd be like, hey, can you pick up that trash? There's a lot of things that we would call trash, right? They're different things, but they're all trash. So similarly, the way the scripture teaches about sexual immorality is there's various things that are sexual immorality. We just lump them all into this category of porneia or sexual immorality. You guys got me? So it's like, it's not just sexual intercourse outside of marriage. It can be more than that, including that question, can you engage in sexual immorality without involving another person?
Well, yeah, I mean, when we did this earlier this morning, we asked that question and someone said, well, like, you guys or girls, when you look at someone and you're lusting after them, you're undressing them in your mind, like, that would be really unfair to say that it's that they're participating in it with you. Mm-hmm. Like for guys in here or girls in here, if you see a guy or a girl who's dressed modestly walking by, and then you just start to like, that's a snack, and then undress them in your bed, and then like you're choosing to do that in and of yourself, for sure. Lustful thoughts.
Is that sexual immorality?
100%.
Yes.
And
did
really,
it involve anyone else? No.
No, that was you. That was you, bro, and sister. That was you. That was only you. So for sure, sexual immorality. It's this idea of it's inappropriate conduct, inappropriate sexual conduct of any kind. Lustful thoughts, looking at porn, sexual joking. That's something that we need to avoid. I know, like, that it was brought up earlier. Like how we're immersed in it. It's so normalized. Like, let's be real, sex jokes are funny because that's something that engages us as people. Anything that's sexual engages us, right? That's why we named it the sex talk, and we say sex a lot. It's engaging for us because it's part of our fallen nature is to want to make an inappropriate idea out of something that God intended to be good and awesome.
And it is good.
And it
is awesome.
It is.
So something else that falls into sexual immorality that's real common now that was not even a thing back when I was your guys' age is sending nudes. you know, and that's huge right now. Like, so let me read you this. This is, again, this isn't from Texas, but this is a youth pastor who posted this. I was talking to my local police chief yesterday about students sending nudes and learned some valuable information. Any student, regardless of age, who asks for nudes is soliciting a minor. If you have a student who has been asked for nudes, his or her parents can call the police and file charges. Now, if it's the first offense, the solicitor will likely just get probation, be ordered to undergo counseling, or stay off the internet or whatever. But that's no guarantee. They could throw the book at him or her. And if a solicitor starts harassing through words or actions someone who turned him or her down, then that's retaliation. So that's extra charges. Things just escalated even more, and there will likely be even less grace by the court. It continues, bear with me. If any student sends nudes of a minor, regardless of if the nude was a willing participant or not, that student is distributing child pornography. Both of these things are federal crimes.
Federal. That's
So,
prison time.
lesson,
Yeah.
don't ask for
Well,
or send nudes.
And think about this, guys.
Sexual immorality.
Yeah, think about this, guys. Like the question talking about normalizing things. That this is our government. This is a secular perspective about an issue like that. Sees that and deems that as convictable by the law. And yet, we as Christians normalize things like this. Like it's not that big of a deal. We try to diminish that. We're going to get into this idea of sin, but I really want us to wrap our minds around a concept that's super, super relevant for us. I kind of mentioned it when we were in our panel discussion right now. Everyone say flee.
Flee.
Flee from youthful passions, and everyone say pursue.
Pursue.
So it's cool. These two words in Greek, flee and pursue, that Paul wrote to Timothy, it's the same word, but just written. It's the same Greek root, but one is saying away, and the other one is saying towards. So it's basically like run away and then run towards, right? And it's cool because flee, the first part of that word, the word flee in Greek actually means run. A question that I've been posed with recently is like, okay, Drew, you say sexuality, it's a gift, God created it for our enjoyment, it's a good thing. It's not just a good thing, it's a great thing. It's not just a great thing, it's an awesome thing, absolutely true. Well, then how am I supposed to express my sexuality right now as like an unmarried young teenager, or maybe some of you in here might be single men or women who are older, their 20s, 30s, or even people that are even older than that. Well, I would say one practical thing that you can do is figure out something that you love to do that's going to physically engage you. Like running, working out, exercising your body. I studied psychology at UTEP, and there's this huge aspect of neurotransmission, all these little neurotransmitters that are floating around in your central nervous system that react when you do different things, and they stimulate different parts of your brain. Two of those big ones are serotonin and dopamine. The important thing to know is that those have to do with pleasure-seeking activity. And when you work out, when you run, or when you lift weight, when you do those kinds of things, you're actually equalizing the balances of those different neurotransmitters, releasing endorphins, and you're actually doing things that are pleasure-seeking activity that's not going to lead to your like sexual impurity or stuff like that. You can actually do stuff that will help you. And I gave this illustration earlier, and as we get into this next part about in our struggle with sin, I just want to kind of start at this point. But yeah, Drew, it's easy to say, like, you kind of avoided the question, like, how do I deal with sexuality right now? You said go on a run. That's not dealing with sexuality. That's just doing something else. Well, fleeing and pursuing, if you're going to flee away from something, you have to replace it with something else. If you just give up something, like if you guys say, I'm going to give up chocolate, or I'm going to give up eating sugar, but like 95% of your diet is eating unhealthy, fatty, sugary things, then you're going to be malnourished if you just stop eating that and don't replace it. So you have to actually correct your diet. You have to start eating healthy things, filling yourself to where you're not hungry anymore with things that are good for you, right? So that's super relevant. And actually in this verse right here, where is it? Okay, and this verse right here, we're supposed to pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace. And everyone say that next word.
Together.
Say it out loud. Pursue it.
Together.
Together. What would you say about that, doing this together, Jeremy?
You on your own, you're not going to beat anything, okay? No struggle, no temptation. On your own, you're not going to beat it. Okay, so finding somebody who you can be honest with, finding somebody who's going to walk with you through your struggles, finding someone who's going to hold you accountable. You heard that from the testimony from Christy at lunchtime. Man, so important, finding that person. Let me do, I was trying to figure out this feature on the Slido thing that does live polls, where I could ask questions and have you guys respond. But I have to pay for that, and I'm cheap, so I'm not going to do it. So let me do this by a show of hands. How many of you guys feel like you have a Christian adult in your life that you can freely talk about something like your sexuality, your temptations towards sex in? Raise your hand if you feel
your mom and dad.
Not necessarily your mom and dad. It could be your mom and dad, but preferably not, because sometimes that gets weird. And it's just honest. Like, I wouldn't talk to my parents about it, but I would talk to a youth leader about it. So hopefully you guys realize that you have people that you can go to talk about this stuff. And here's the thing that I've seen over and over with students is if you're not together, if you're not willing to open up with others, then you think you're the only one dealing with that. Christy said that too during the testimony. She thought she was the only female that was looking at porn. It was only other. She was the only woman in the world. No, man, you're not the only teenager who's wondering how to deal with this, or who's maybe gone down a rabbit hole on the internet and gotten into stuff that you shouldn't be into, or took a step too far in your relationship with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You're not the only one. So don't be ashamed to go and tell someone who is following the Lord and who supports you and loves you and say, hey, I'm dealing with this, and I know it doesn't honor God. Can you help me? Okay, they're not going to look at you and run. They're going to stand by you and walk with you through that. Okay?
Yeah, so those who call on the Lord with a pure heart, that's what we're to do with people that do that. I know even, like, with me, I looked at porn for the better part of 10 years, and even into the first year of marriage, I was still struggling with looking at porn once I got married to my wife. And I had to take some really awkward steps in a way that I justified that and like avoided that. I was like, well, I don't want to hurt my wife's feelings, so I'm not going to say anything to her. Until it got to the point where she caught me one time. That was brutal. And then we had a serious conversation after, she was hurt and it was awful, and we had some really hard conversations, but some good conversations, and I got her involved in my pursuit of holiness. And now I have covenant eyes on everything, on my phone, on my iPad. She has like restrictions. It's almost been 6 years now. She has restrictions on all my stuff. I can't even look at it if I wanted to. And guys, the temptation is still very real. I'm almost 30 years old. I'm a pastor. I have responsibilities in ministry. I'm married. I have the desire to have kids one day, and I still have these temptations every single day. Not just full disclosure, every single day. I still think about looking at porn. I still think about lusting after. I still have these thoughts, which is, man, I'm going to cry. It helped me so much when I involved my wife in my pursuit of holiness, and it's just led to so much joy, so much freedom and redemption. And you have a couple of things to say about temptation, Jeremy. You want to address that?
Let me get to a couple of these questions real quick.
Okay.
One question is, can sex get out of hand? We'll get to that in this coming answer. I'm going to lump some of these together. Give your honest, we'll save that. There's a couple of these that might deal with marriage a little bit. Let me go back. This was a question in response to sending nudes. If someone sends you nudes and you didn't ask, does that count as sexual immorality? And then another one says, does Jesus know when you're about to commit sexual immorality? In the Bible, it says Jesus is already prepared to forgive. So let me lump some of those into the idea of the difference between temptation and sin. Okay? So if you don't hear anything from this workshop except this, temptation is not sin. Okay? Being tempted or feeling a desire to pursue something is not sin. James chapter 1. Okay, it says that it's sin when your temptation drags you away and you give into it and you act on it. That's sin. Okay? So Jesus was tempted. Okay? Satan came to him in three ways, and it actually fit into the three other loves. He tempted Jesus in his pride. He tempted Jesus with lust of the flesh, physical needs, and he tempted Jesus with power or greed. All right, and Jesus was without sin. Okay, you can be tempted, but you don't have to act on that temptation. Okay, when I was younger, my parents were very humble, and we had very little money because my parents were missionaries, and I always wanted more stuff. So I became very tempted to steal things. And for a while, I gave in to that temptation. Did that make it feel, did that make stealing right? Just because I felt so strongly that I wanted it? No, that was sin. Okay? Being tempted is not sin. Yeah. So when you deal with same-sex attraction, a tendency to want to look at porn, a tendency to want to be physically active and sexually active with your boyfriend, your girlfriend, those temptations are going to come from a variety of factors. But that doesn't mean that you're a sinful human, I'm disgusting because I feel this way. No, how do you handle it? Yeah. How do you handle it? Okay? So temptation is not sin. You guys good with that? Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, similarly, if you didn't get to the LGBTQ breakout session that was in the morning, awesome explanation of that same thing is just because you're same-sex attracted doesn't mean that you just pursue that lifestyle and become gay or lesbian, right? Having same-sex attraction, if you act on it, is sexual immorality. But if you're just dealing with it because of your upbringing, or maybe you were, you have this hurt in your background or whatever that's led you to not trust guys, so you're going to like girls instead, or vice versa, that's not sin. It's when you act on it that it becomes sin. I'm going to say it 20 more times just so we make sure. So with that, here's a couple of questions. If you commit sexual immorality, how do you deal with it after? That's a good question. What if you're not a virgin? How do you overcome the fact that you've already committed sexual immorality, and how do you give yourself a clean slate? You want to take those two? I think are very similar.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we serve a redeeming God, and He sent Jesus to die for us. And if you read Isaiah chapter 53, it says that Jesus, he, like a lamb led to before its shears, he did not say a word. For it was, listen to this, guys, it was the will of God to crush him. Meaning that God's plan A, when he spoke existence into existence, when he spoke everything into being, his plan A was to send Jesus to redeem the world. It wasn't like he was like, oh man, they sinned, what am I going to do? Oh, I have there's Jesus. Okay, this component of our nature, like the Son, and he's going to take on humanity. I figured it out. No, that was his will. That was the plan A. And so God specializes in redeeming us. And there's nothing, there's no situation, Isaiah says that the arm of the Lord is not too short that it can't save. And you can put redeem there, you can put reconcile, you can put fix, whatever. And guys, if you have done things, and if you've had sex, or if you have a porn addiction, if you have anything else that could be categorized under sexual immorality, which I'd venture to say 100% of us have or do, God can give us and can give you perfect redemption from that. 100%. Because that's why Jesus came and lived and died and resurrected. So that we could have a redefined and renewed purpose in that context. And so there's three things that we want to finish with.
Real quick.
After this.
Let me jump on that, because I think that's where the enemy gets a lot of believers is, okay, you realize what you're doing is not honoring to the Lord, but stopping or changing or refocusing, that's where he's going to attack you. Okay, especially if you're in a relationship where you have gone too far according to God's standards. If you're still with the girl or the guy that you've gone too far with, it's so hard to overcome that and pursue purity.
Yeah.
But it's doable if you do if you involve other people,
Yeah.
right? If you bring other people, say, hey, we need your help in this. Can you help keep us accountable? We don't want to pursue this, but the temptation is strong. We've already been there, so it's easy to go back. Can you help us in that? Get help.
Yeah.
Okay, involve other people in your struggle.
Well, in my notes here, I have this concept like the just one more syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
It'll be the last one.
Yeah, it's two ways that by that, like, okay, after this I won't do it again. And the other side of it is like, I've already done it a million times.
So one more.
Just one more time. I've already cut that ship sailed kind of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That is alive in the pit of hell. That is made to distract you, and it's made to just cripple you and make you feel so unable. And that's, God wants you to kind of get out of that way of thinking. Really, the most practical way that we overcome things that we're doing, it starts in your mind. It's just a couple right steps in how you think about something in the right direction, and then just sort of pursuing those things and doing it, fleeing, pursuing. I'm not going to do this, so I'm going to do this. And when we think about sin, there's really three. You have them in your notes there. These last three things that we do in our struggle with sin. In our struggle against sin, first thing is that we don't take it all seriously. It being sin, like we need to make what God says our authority. So if God is black and white about something, and He is all the time, and if He says something is sin, that this is how it should be, this is how it shouldn't be, that's where we need to line up our ideas with. And this great illustration, which Jeremy will talk about here in a second, goes along with this idea of about how we as human beings tend to categorize sins. We kind of put sins into different categories, and then we make less or more out of different things. But tell us about this illustration right here.
Yeah, see that picture? It's a little hard to read, but the one on the left says a side view, how we see sin. And that's what, I'm only looking at porn. It's just me. And that's not as bad as that guy who's sleeping with his girlfriend who's also a Christian. He shouldn't be doing that. That's a worse sin than where I'm at. Or, this is really unfortunate, Christians have developed a stereotype of hating gay people. We treat that sin as way worse than it, and it's not. It's sin, it's outside of God's plan, but they're no worse than you looking at porn. Or you undressing that guy or girl with your eyes, right? So from the top view, how would God see a bar graph? He's looking down at it from the top, and He sees it all the same, okay? There's no levels of sin. Now, there's different levels of consequences to sin. Like, for example, if you murder somebody, there's a whole bunch of consequences that are going to be worse. I mean, you're affecting a whole family, and they're grieving, and they've lost somebody, and this child lost a father, or whatever. I mean, there's different consequences, but sin is sin.
Yeah.
Is sin. Is sin. So there's no worse things, all right?
Yeah. Well, and that idea flows perfectly into this next point. In our struggle against sin, we are self-centered and not God-centered. And you're like, well, yeah, obviously, self. But focusing, what I mean specifically by this is, if I was to ask you guys the question, like, what is your motivation? Like, what motivates you or excites you about the idea of, like, everyone think of that one sin, and there's this word transgression that's used in Scripture, and it means something that you just keep doing over and 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 over again. So that one sin that you keep doing, it's like if you were to think of never doing that one sin again, what excites you the most about that? And for people, it tends to be this concept of like, well, I'll feel good. I won't feel shame. I'll have joy. I'll be able to like I'll be able to like sleep at night, and that's true. That'd be nice. But those are all very selfish motivations for overcoming sin.
If you don't have a partner and do not watch porn, but you masturbate for relief of sexual tension, is it sexual immorality?
That's a really good question. So there's this one person that I know, and it's really weird, but we're doing the sex talk, and he said, and this is one extreme example that I've ever heard of it, and so I'm really sharing this to kind of err on the other side of the point I'm making. So don't mishear me right now. Don't be like, oh, okay, there's a way to do it where it's okay. And he said, he's like, this is very, very explicit, I apologize, but he was like, there was one time where I thought that I was gonna like explode. Like, I had blue ball. It hurts so bad. And he was like, I told you, he was explicit. And he said, I literally, this is weird. This isn't me, this is my friend. I won't say who it is. He was like, I literally was just thinking about Super Smash Brothers. And he's like, and then I felt fine afterwards.
So I'm not a medical professional, but no one in the history of ever has died from a lack of sex.
Never.
Okay? Again, I'm not a doctor, but I know for a fact that no one in the history of ever has literally had a case of blue balls and has then like died because of it.
Well, and I'll say this, that's not a thing.
Okay, and actually, since we're being explicit, there's a natural way to deal with that. Okay, and you said blue ball, so I'm going to say wet dreams. Okay, that's a thing. That's a real thing. Like sometimes.
You were the first Christian leader that I've ever heard talk about that. That was like, I've already talked about it with my dad and all that, and talked about that whole season. But literally, I was lost for 4 years. Like, I felt guilty.
You wake up and you're like,
4 years.
I'm going to go to hell.
The first time I've ever heard anyone say that. My God.
Yeah, well, again, you should be able to talk about this stuff in church because God designed it, okay?
Yeah.
But it's real. Like, so you don't need to do that to release anything. If you really need to release something, then God will allow that to happen in your body. If you feel like you really need to release something, go for a run.
Yes. Go for a run.
Or go work out. Okay?
These are really good questions, guys, because it's stuff that we deal with every day, and we're fooling ourselves to think that we don't.
We have just a couple minutes left, so
Yeah.
let's get to a couple of these questions that we did not.
Yeah.
One question is a real simple answer. How do you bring up how bad sex is to your friends who have sex all the time? If they're believers, you gently and lovingly speak the truth to them and say, hey man, like this is not honoring God. If you really want to honor God, then we need to deal with this. If they're not Christians, who cares? They don't care. They're not called to the standard that we as believers are called to, and unless they decide to come to Jesus,
Very difficult.
Remember earlier, I don't know who it was, but that talked about normalizing sin, normalizing sexuality in our society. Like, we shouldn't be surprised, first of all, when non-believers act like non-believers.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And you should assume responsibility for this, guys. If you call yourself Christ followers, you should assume responsibility that it's your job. Ephesians 4:29, let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. So that's what we should flee from, unwholesome talk. And then what we pursue, but only what is useful for building others up according to their needs. And so we should assume that it's our response. If sexuality and everything under this lump sum is normalized in our society, then you should assume that it's your responsibility to be like a current that changes the way that you interact with your friends. It doesn't mean that you're Bible thumping them all the time and going like, that's bad what you're doing. It means that you're going to be willing to not indulge in those worthless things that they're talking about, and that you'll find creative and healthy and relevant ways of just like bringing something else up, talking about sports, about the Lord.
And your different perspective is going to be noticed, and they're going to ask you why you don't.
Yeah.
And then that's where you have an opportunity to share about the Lord. So last question. Give your honest impression of what sex is compared to the movies and media and immoral friends stories. I'm going to lump that in with two other questions. Can sex get out of hand, and are condoms bad? So if we're talking about sex within a marriage, which is what God's design is, that can still be a real point of issue in marriages, but it's something that can always be worked through. I'm blessed by the Lord that's never been an issue in my marriage. Some people call it sexual compatibility or whatever. I've had a very great experience. It sounds awkward talking about this. Some of you guys know my wife. It's been something that's been a blessing in our marriage. So my honest impression of what sex is, when it happens the way God designs it, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. When you experience it outside of His design, it's going to lead to guilt, shame. The enemy's going to try and make it that, but really what that is conviction. Yeah. It's the Lord saying, hey, this isn't how it's supposed to be. There's a better way.
Yeah.
Okay? So with that, can it get out of hand? Yeah. When you make it about yourself, even if you're married, if it's about you and fulfilling your desires, then it can get out of hand. Yeah. And then the last question, are condoms bad? I have friends, Christian friends, who are married, who have pursued birth control in a lot of different ways, including condoms, and it's worked for them. And others it hasn't worked for. So are they bad? Is not really, I don't think that it's a matter of good or bad. It's just, you know, that's between you and the Lord. How are you handling?
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
if what we're saying is true, and it is based off of His Word, that sex is created for our enjoyment. It's not just for procreation. It's created for our enjoyment. It's created to express ourselves physically in a way that really is it's the best way to it's awesome. It's not the best. The best way to physically express ourselves as people is using your body to worship God. But in the context of a true biblical marriage, that is worship. Have you thought about that before? And so for us, yeah, married men have thought about that. For us as married, if you're married, I don't know, most of you probably aren't. Yeah, you look like you're not, but you raised your hand, so you must be. Yeah, like to ask the questions like, well, what's okay to do in the bedroom with your spouse? Well, I'm not a referee that's going to be like, that's weird. You shouldn't do such. No, like what he said, it's. Like what sex isn't and what porn does is that it's all about, like it's just ratification, it's this unrealistic idea of like what sex should look like. But sex is exactly what Jeremy said, it's about the other person. It's about being attentive to their needs, it's about being attentive to what they enjoy, what they find pleasurable, and that has a very wide range for different people. And so I think...
And porn does not portray that.
No.
And just to break it to you, porn is not real, it's acting. Those people are getting paid to be on camera to make something look like it's looking on camera, and that's not real life.
And a lot of them are being forced.
This question, is cartoon porn bad? Yes. Why? Because it's still it's making you think about something that you shouldn't be thinking about.
Yeah.
Reading it too.
Reading it. Ooh, that's good.
Some woman.
We are out of time.
Cool.
So, if you guys have questions, Drew's going to be on stage in a second, so he's got to get out of here. But if you guys have questions or want to discuss anything further, we've got a couple minutes for that. But let me just pray for us. God, thank you for your word. And, man, we could dig into this issue in a lot of different ways. And we should, because if you are God and if your word, the Bible, is truly your word, which we believe both of those things to be true, then we should dig in and find out what it says about the questions we have in life, the temptations or desires that we tend to deal with. But above all, God, we just pray for your best in our life. We know that that's what you want for us. And you don't prohibit things for our own misery. You give us guidelines to bless us and to guide us into the fullness that only you can provide. So help us to understand that and to desire purity and righteousness in our life. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys. If you guys have any questions, I'll hang out for a few minutes. But main session, and we're going to close things out.